Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Smarter Growth webinar, the 8 Counterintuitive Steps to Building a Purpose-Driven Organization. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so should you have any issues during the broadcast, please type a question into the question box and I will help you. We do want today's session to be interactive, so don't be shy. Please type questions in, your thoughts, and we will get to them as the webinar continues. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our founder and CEO, Alan Todd.
Thanks, Jessica. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, the 8 Counterintuitive Steps to Building a Purpose-Driven Organization. I'm really excited about this because today's speaker, Bob Quinn, there's a timeline of work. So Bob's been a giant in the field of leadership and publishing books and doing research and teaching and consulting over decades. When I walk the halls at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, there's reverence for Bob Quinn. He is the quintessential rock star faculty. And the timeline that I want to share is, it was last July, August, the Harvard Business Review chose to publish Bob's story on a purpose-driven organization, Bob and his co-author, Anjan Thakur. They chose to put it on the cover of the Harvard Business Review, and that was a story that became the book, The Economics of Higher Purpose, which I'm showing on the screen, which Bob's going to talk about today. But I wanted to just set up this timeline. So this comes out last July, August, in the summertime, and in January 17th of this year, the New York Times front page, the world's biggest investor tells CEOs, purpose is the animating force for profits. And I think this is, Andrew Ross Sorkin called it from the New York Times, we're at an inflection point in business. And what's interesting is, if you don't know Larry Fink, he's probably the most famous guy you don't know. So Larry Fink manages $6 trillion in assets under management. So you think about, just to put that into perspective, the size of the US economy is about $20 trillion. So Larry Fink buys stocks. There is not a publicly traded company whose CEO would not jump to answer the phone if Larry Fink is calling. But what's interesting is that he has started a movement towards demanding that organizations become purpose-driven organizations, and he's gone further to say he's going to hold them accountable. If you're not purpose-driven, over time, they're going to sell your stock. And because they manage so much money, they control the stock price to a very strong extent. And then August, if we fast forward 7 months to just about a month ago, the era of shareholder primacy, the Business Roundtable shocked everybody. And the New York Times wrote, we're at a watershed moment in business. So we were at an inflection point, then we got to a watershed moment. So like, what's happening right now? Also, interestingly enough, the Business Roundtable, when they come out with this article that says shareholder primacy, which has always been the purpose of an organization is to create shareholder value. Milton Friedman won a Nobel Prize for this. He wrote a seminal piece that was published in the New York Times in 1970 that they quoted and referenced on August 19th. And this document was a big deal because the Business Roundtable came out. It was signed by Jeff Bezos at Amazon, and Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, and IBM and Accenture, and all of these, the giants in the world had signed on to change that. The statement of the purpose of a corporation is not shareholder value, but all stakeholder value. It is indeed a watershed moment, and I would put it in the timeline. What was interesting is when this happened with the Business Roundtable in the New York Times, it was that day that Bob's book, The Economics of Higher Purpose, came out. So I thought, Bob and I were talking on the phone. I said, I just can't believe it. This was the shot heard around the world. When the Business Roundtable updated their purpose of a corporation, it was on the cover of every major newspaper, business, trade publication that you could imagine. So I think we are in a whole new world around creating value for all the stakeholders, so the communities, the people. They wrote in here a whole thing about investing in our employees. So this is something that companies didn't make a commitment to do in the past. And so now nearly 200 CEOs of the world's largest companies have signed on and pledged that they're going to invest in their people, their suppliers, their stakeholders, their community. And which underscores yet another movement. And this movement, if you haven't heard about it, it's called a B Corp. And Fortune magazine says this is one of the trends you better pay attention to. Fast Company, one of the 20 moments that mattered in the last 20 years. So what's a B Corp? I just real quick, they have a declaration of interdependence. So I thought this was beautiful. But what it says is we envision a global economy that uses business as a force for good. And as you all know, this is a crucial conversation that is happening all over the world right now. So political institutions have been breaking down. They're not communicating. They're not getting things done. And business needs to step into the void. And so if you look at this fourth line down, a B corporation, which is purpose-driven and creates benefits for all stakeholders. Again, hammering purpose-driven. Here's an example: the number of companies, and I have a whole bunch of other slides on this that I'm not going to share, but it's basically you look at Unilever, you look at Procter & Gamble, many of the businesses they're buying are all certified B Corps. So you're going to see more and more B Corps. So let's just transition and get to a final point here, and that is, if you ask people, does purpose matter? So Harvard Business Review wrote a piece called The Business Case for Purpose. And these crazy supermajorities say that purpose drives employee satisfaction. And a crazy supermajority say that a strong purpose drives innovation and transformation, drives customer loyalty, right? Okay, so that's pretty easy. But here's the problem. Only 39% can actually have a purpose that's clear. Half of them can't connect purpose to transformation. 41% people are disconnected between senior leaders and the employees that actually have to live the purpose. And 45% say shareholder pressures for short term is the biggest barrier to become purpose driven. So even though everyone believes it, a supermajority, super minorities are actually getting something done. So let's look at Deloitte. They do a study. Exact same thing, putting purpose to work. Nearly 80% believe purpose is critical to business success. But yet a tiny fraction, 1/3, say that leaders use it as a guidepost in decision making. And 27% of leaders help employees find their purpose or meaning. So only 27% of leaders actually help employees do that. And yet when they do that, they did in this Deloitte study, they tracked millennials and said those that had a strong connection to the employer's purpose are 5 times more likely to say, 5.3 times. So it's kind of a simple no-brainer here, super important, but nobody's doing it. And finally, you can look at Gallup did the same thing. So everybody's kind of familiar with Gallup with employee engagement. Fewer than 1/3 are engaged. But I pulled this out just because what they said was prioritizing meaning and purpose amplifies employee engagement, and that managers account for at least 70% of the variance. So managers are the lever that people aren't pulling. And then sadly, in psychology today, less than 1/3 of your employees are thriving, and 70% are struggling or suffering at work. And then they go on to point out that leaders are the people that can help employees thrive. So we've got to invest in these frontline leaders to help people thrive and flourish as opposed to struggle and suffer. And finally, I'm going to finish with Viktor Frankl. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. And Viktor Frankl found his purpose when he sat in Auschwitz and sat in concentration camps and contemplated what is his meaning in life. And he found his purpose in life and was able to write one of the most famous books, Man's Search for Meaning, but just to write about that experience. But it's about finding your purpose and gaining meaning in your life in ways that you control inside of you and not the world outside of you. Okay, so let's get moving real quick, folks. Let's do a poll. So we're going to put a poll up and ask a quick question. Then I'm going to turn it over to Bob. So do your organizations have a clear and higher purpose beyond making a profit that's lived and breathed? Jessica, let's do the poll. All right, folks, we'll give you 40 seconds. While that's coming in, I'm going to, as soon as I put these results up, I'm going to turn it over to the master, Bob Quinn, to give us his thoughts on what people are saying. How are we doing? We close? Okay, 5 more seconds. Get your votes in. 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, close it. So Bob, first of all, welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Alan.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today. We're excited. I want to start before we get into your opening remarks. What do you think of this poll? Hopefully, you see it on your screen. But about 78%, we're right at that super majority thing. That it's true in pockets of the organization. What's actually really interesting is no one said that it's not true at all for us. So what this says to me is that purpose, they're thinking about it and it's happening in places, but only 22% say we're truly purpose driven. What do you think of that?
I think that's very, very representative of the general pattern that I've encountered in it. A number of studies vary slightly, but those numbers would be very close. There are a few that are really putting it to work and discovering how to do that. There are a lot, enormous number of people who value it, but just don't know how to get it past those small pockets. So these numbers make a great deal of sense to me.
Yeah, and I think, and when we get to the end today, we do have a special offer for folks because we're launching an online course called Building a Purpose-Driven Organization with Bob, and we're going to have a Corpu Open program, which is a multi-company program. We're going to give you the details at the end for how to sign up for that for those of you that are in our meeting today. So, without further ado, Bob, let's turn it over to you and let's get to some of your comments. Why don't you start us off and talk about the economics of higher purpose and give us your point of view on all this?
Absolutely. It's the basic message, Alan, that I hear you saying is, look, people want it. They desperately want it, but no one knows how to do it. And I think there are some very understandable reasons for that. And the first one has to do with this diagram. My co-author, Anjan Thacker, is a world-class economist, and he very patiently explained to me the principal-agent problem. He said, I'm the principal or the employer. I hire you, and I say, I'm going to give you this many dollars for this many hours worked. So we have a contract. The moment, as long as he's there to watch me or to measure me, then the contract works. But the moment he turns his back, I underperform the contract. That's the principal-agent problem. It's the heart of microeconomics. There have been Nobel Prizes won on that concept. If you click the next button now, basically what that's saying is that we're all self-interested. That's a fundamental assumption of economics. When we did our first paper on this topic, it was all mathematical. It was a simulation, mathematical simulation of an organization. It was a conventional organization, and then we introduced one new factor into that model, and that was the shift from lack of purpose to having a higher purpose. When we introduced that shift, the entire model changed, and all the agents became owners. It was a stunning finding, and Anjan was just really excited about that. And the point is, and you click the next one, Alan, is that when we move from self-interest to collective interest, great things happen. That happens everywhere, in sports, in business. In sports, we call it team chemistry. I recently was with a general manager who said it's the most important variable for managers, for coaches. We all understand this. Very few of us can create it. That's a stunning thing for sports people. Well, it holds for all of us. And that's at the very heart of the problem is the social world we live in is based on some very basic assumptions that have been demonstrated empirically, and one is self-interest. Let's go to the next slide, Alan. And go ahead and click it for that middle list to come up. If you think about these assumptions, we organize in hierarchies. People are self-interested. They're analytic decision makers. Resources are scarce. Those are the first three assumptions of economics. As a result, there are constant clashing interests. We're economically motivated. The relationships are transactional. We're constantly, therefore, monitoring threats. So much as an eyebrow raise on the boss's had during a meeting. We're monitoring every possible threat. The communication that we exchange in organizations is filtered. What's this person's agenda? Our engagement is naturally restricted, and the learning is incremental. The result of that is what we live in. And Alan, if you click it twice, I think that next, there you go, that next list comes up. This is what we experience constantly. The loss of communal focus, competing priorities, negative peer pressure. Negative peer pressure is so powerful and exists at the blue-collar level. It exists in the C-suite. There's a need, therefore, for micromanagement. Our interactions are constrained. We reproduce the past. We're avoiding the work of conflict. Those relationships are conflictual. The silos emerge and we become isolated. And we burn resources, billions of dollars of resources. When I ask executives if this list looks familiar to them, there's this grave look on their face and the heads start to nod. This is where we live day to day in large organizations. We have an underlying theory of social action. It's represented in the middle of the curve. Because of it, we are constantly moving to disorder or the breakdown of organizing, and we're managing problems. We're trying to bring things back to the middle of the curve. With that in mind, now let's click the next slide. And let's take a little poll. In our organization, there are conflicts and silo behaviors. We don't have them. We have pockets of conflict. We have lots of conflict. Let's take a look. Please give us a response, and we'll give you 30 seconds to click those in.
Okay, folks, poll is in progress. Let's give you 30 seconds here. We're at 60%. Keep going, folks. Let's get higher. All right, we're good. Close the poll. We got it. Thank you all, and back to you, Bob.
Okay, so we've got 8% who have no conflicts. So I think those folks can turn off right now and go about their business. I don't think they need us. The rest of us, this is pretty real stuff, and at the very heart of our experience. Alan, let's go to the next slide.
All right, coming up. Get that off there. There you go.
And there we go. So, we live in organizational cultures. Those cultures are socially constructed. They emerge as we interact with one another. When commitment to the common good begins to wither, the process of social construction becomes self-interested. As the people disengage, performance declines, positive adaptations unlikely, the system breaks down. This picture of the trees for me is very vivid. This is what we're fighting constantly, is avoiding those trees on the right and trying to get to that tree on the left. And it's all about how we interact with each other. Alan, let's go to the next one.
And Bob, just a point for the audience. I think some of the work you've done on cultural assessments, I think you've built, you and your team, maybe the #1 used model and framework in the world for culture change.
We have done a lot of work on culture change for this church.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to point out that the organizational cultural assessment instrument, competing values. So you've been doing this kind of work for decades with really big uptake in the marketplace on your work. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so this brings us to the how-to question. I mean, those are the constraints. And then the question is how to. And if we click it one more time, Alan, a little circle will come up here. And I just want to briefly talk through these 8 steps, because I think a lot of the questions in a few minutes will be focused on these how-tos. And let me just make a few comments on each one. Number 1, and each of these is counterintuitive. With our editors said, it has to be simple enough to understand. And then people, once we did that, they said, well, these aren't counterintuitive. Well, they are. Let me try to explain why. Envision the inspired workforce. An inspired workforce is one in which people have transcended the principal agent problem. Everyone's totally committed. We don't envision that. We don't assume that. We don't even imagine that. We're operating from those daily assumptions I've already shown, and they assume that people are not committed. The notion of envisioning that workforce and the ideal we're looking for, many of us reject it as being impractical, and we don't do it. We have to learn from excellence, and I'll talk about what that is on the last slide. The process of actually discovering the purpose, the normal assumption is if we're going to do this, I, the boss, need to be very smart and announce what the purpose is. Our experience with the best organizations we've done research with is that's not how it happens. It's just the opposite of that. It requires an enormous amount of collective empathy, of actually listening deeply to the people, asking them what the purpose is. I think of one of the best examples in the book is the former dean of the education school at Michigan, Deborah Ball. Deborah took over the school. She was very young academically, unusually so for a dean. She was concerned. She said, I've never read even a book on leadership. How can I be a dean? So what she did is she brought her natural expertise. She knew how to turn an ordinary fourth grade classroom into a brilliant, excellent fourth grade classroom. And she then proceeded to do the exact same thing to the School of Education at the University of Michigan. And she started with the clarification of purpose. She went to every faculty member and held conversations about what do you believe our highest purpose is. She said it was 20% gold and 80% trash in every one of those conversations. But she took the gold and then she would feed it back into the next conversation and the next, until gradually a picture began to form in which she began to see this image crystallize. Eventually, it was three basic prongs in this vision of higher purpose. And she said, okay, this is where we're going to go. Many people, or some people I should say, left the system immediately. They said, this is not who I am. Now that's important. When you're doing purpose work and you get real and serious about it, people will leave because, surprisingly enough, they don't want to be a part of this new system, or they don't see themselves as a part of the new system, and they leave. But simultaneously, something else happens. She found that immediately, all over the world, top scholars were anxious to come because they were aligned with the purpose, and it made a big difference. When we begin to articulate our purpose, it attracts people that we need, and people who we don't need are repelled by it. And so I just had to get the image back up on my screen there for a second, sorry. And so the notion of discovering the purpose is hard work. I ask very hard questions of executives about their own units and tell me what the essence of this unit is and what its highest purpose is. Very few of them can answer that. It requires a kind of learning that's very demanding and counterintuitive. It's hard work. Step 3, make the purpose authentic. The word authentic is the single most important word in the entire purpose movement. Many leaders can't even imagine authentic purpose. Now, what is an authentic purpose? It's captured here and in the next step. An authentic purpose becomes the arbiter of every decision. When you have a purpose that's real, then every decision is played against that purpose. And it causes you to make decisions that are uncomfortable, inconvenient. When you have a higher purpose, you do things that are value-driven, that are not convenient, that are not normal business decision to make. So it immediately differentiates you. I think of Zingerman's in Ann Arbor, very famous chain of food organizations. That's a very much purpose-driven organization. When the last recession hit, the first thought was going to need to make cuts. They did an in-depth analysis. One of the things they decided was that instead of cutting training, which is always the first move, they were going to increase their investment in training, because if you're in a recession, people are going to come to their restaurants. They were coming because it was a special occasion, because they can't afford to come as they normally did. And so they needed better service and better food and better treatment than ever. They trained their people. They cut nobody. They increased their donations to many of the food organizations that they supported in the local area. Totally irrational economically. During the recession, Zingerman's did not lose a penny. They held steady, and then they began to climb. There are similar stories about a number of organizations, but it's always, we end up making hard decisions that we normally wouldn't make. They're counterintuitive decisions, and they take us places we normally wouldn't go, and the outside world reacts to us differently. There is story after story after story in purpose-driven organizations when they do something counterintuitive, like closing all the retail stores in a chain on Black Friday. Economic suicide. What happened? Enormous new loyalty from a large number of customers. We see patterns that are not within the common sense thinking, the logical thinking of everyday economics. And I think of an example. We're in a company in Ohio. A woman's talking. She's a mid-level manager. She says, my boss just told me to do this, and I told him no. And every head in the table snapped and looked at her. She said, I said to him, look, this is not our highest purpose. It's counter to our highest purpose. It's not the right thing to do. The boss's response? Oh, yes, thank you. The CEO sitting next to me, and he says, you see, when you have a higher purpose and it's authentic, it's the arbiter of every decision. That means everybody's empowered. It was a brilliant moment. Most people cannot imagine having a higher purpose that's the arbiter of every decision. The next step is constancy. The person that taught me this was Tony Miola. He was a senior vice president at Bank of America. He was in charge of global operations. His statement was, when you know your purpose and when you're constant, every time one of your direct reports comes in with a question, you start with the purpose. You ask them what the right answer is. Pretty soon they don't come in because they don't need to come in. When you're constant, the culture will change. So authenticity and constancy are sister concepts, absolutely crucial to the process. There are 85% of the Fortune 500 companies who currently have a purpose statement. The vast majority of them are inauthentic and have nothing to do with being constant. That is, they did it because they were politically expected to write a purpose. What they've done is positive harm, because when the people look at those things on the wall, they roll their eyes. They're more cynical than they were before because it's a false statement. It's not real. That's sounds simple, incomprehensible to most executives. Purpose and learning and growth. In every organization we know that is purpose-driven, you see the people fully engaged and you see them learning and growing. And the executives who understand the process realize that their job is to facilitate that growth. At Zingerman's, it's all about wait staff, people you expect to have enormously high turnover. They don't expect them to stay at Zingerman's. So what do? They invest enormous amounts of money in training every single person in the company, number one, on open book finance so that they could run the company. And they train them to be entrepreneurs so that when they leave waiting on tables, they can go start their own business. Sounds crazy until you talk to those people waiting on the tables and they talk about how they're seeing their life differently in the future. When people are engaged, when people are growing, you're going to get the best out of you people. It's unthinkable by normal economic assumptions. Turning mid-level managers into purpose-driven leaders. Now, if it doesn't get to this level, if it only happens in the C-suite and just below, if you don't get to the middle managers, you don't have a purpose-driven organization. And the research currently shows that in the companies that prosper financially because they have a higher purpose, they have two characteristics. One, the purpose is crystal clear. People understand it, they feel it. Two, it's all the way down to the middle. And the people at the middle are leading by the purpose. That's the kind of work most companies do not know how to do or want to do. It's scary and it's costly. It's a huge and key item in the process. Connecting to all the people to the purpose. If companies succeed getting the middle managers, they're delighted and they quit. They don't believe they can get to the bottom level. All they can do is announce it to those bottom level people. The most brilliant move I've ever seen at this level is by KPMG, an organization full of accountants. How are you going to do purpose with accountants? They came up with a brilliant strategy. It was a digital poster, an empty space in the middle for your picture, the company's forward purpose on the poster, and then a blank space for your purpose. They told the people that if this was in June, if by Thanksgiving 10,000 people create a poster, we'll give you we'll give everybody 2 extra days off at Christmas break. By the 4th of July, they had their 10,000. By Thanksgiving, they had almost 41,000, and there were less than 41,000 employees. And not only did all the individuals make it, some made 2, and most of the teams made posters. They had things on there. Here would be an accountant, and she'd say, my purpose is to fight terrorism. And then underneath that, when I do an audit, I am ensuring that money cannot be moved to inappropriate places where we all suffer. They absolutely loved it. They all bought into it. The numbers and the impact afterwards on KPMG were startling. Financial numbers were best place to work numbers, engagement numbers, huge leap. That was incredibly counterintuitive, creative work. Most companies don't even want to think about those kinds of things, or they don't think about those kinds of things. Final step, unleash the positive energizers. In every company we've worked with, we've inserted this step. Every company is full of people who are positive energizers. They imbue other people with energy. We love to be around them. We almost never tap this network. In our work, we encourage companies to tap the network, identify these people at all levels, and make them your change team. A large change team, positive energizers. Vet your ideas on them first, have them implement the ideas, and we have seen enormous success come of that. So those are the 8 counterintuitive ideas and steps. It's a very practical framework, but it is counterintuitive. Alan, let's look at the last slide.
We just have one more poll between the last slides.
All right. To what extent is this true for your organization? Our people are flourishing and they find meaning in their work. True for less than 20%, true for 20 to 50, true for almost everyone. Let's fill that one out.
All right, here we go. 30 seconds. While people are voting, we're going to get to questions with Bob after his last slide. So if you have any questions after the poll, please feel free to type those into the question box for us. Give you 10 more seconds. 5 seconds. We're good. We're over 70. Keep going. All right, we're done.
Okay.
What do you think, Bob?
So those statistics also look somewhat familiar. We know that 71% of the global workforce is disengaged at work. 51% of the managerial workforce is disengaged at work. So these numbers are a little bit better, but suggest, we have some real challenges. And there's huge gains to be made in this set of numbers, right? In terms of, that translates to real money. If we make a
well, I look at it. Yeah, you're talking 78% of the people on this in our meeting today have said it's true for 50% or less. So half our people are not flourishing. So this is slightly better than that Psychology Today slide I put up. And by the way, everybody usually asks all of our slides. I'll be posting them in a PDF format, so you'll get that.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that data. Let's look at on this last slide.
Yep.
So let's click up the first two lists. Keep clicking, Alan.
Yeah, we got the curly cues there. There you go.
Okay, and so those are the two lists we looked at before. People recognize the middle assumptions. Everybody in social science has demonstrated that, although we don't consciously articulate it. This is the theory that drives organization, the middle group. The list on the left we've already discussed. We said, here's the consequence of that. And everybody recognizes that. Now let me put up what we don't recognize. Alan, let's click that last list. Social excellence. We embrace a higher purpose. We have shared vision, positive peer pressure. The leadership is distributed. It's coming from the bottom as well as the top. The dialogue is authentic. We're constantly co-creating possibility. We're self-organizing. Our contributions are spontaneous. Everybody's an owner. The learning is symbiotic because the conversations are authentic. When you say something, I build on it. When I say something, you build on mine. We are creating things in our conversations that we don't when we're living in filtered communication. The collective intelligence is constantly functioning. Collective intelligence means you and I are co-creating new perspectives in every conversation. It's exciting, it's energizing, and we're creating value as we do. Therefore, we are generating resources. Now, this list is the opposite of the list on the left. When I put that up there cold, most executives say, oh, that's not realistic. That's Pollyanna. That's just not worth considering. The fact is, when we put on the positive lens, go out and look at organizations, this is exactly what we find. When we're at our very best, this is how we function. It's crucial that we not only learn from failure, which is the left side of the curve, which research says we primarily learn from, but that we also learn from excellence. The research at the University of Michigan is all about articulating the social excellence that actually happens in the world. If we begin to learn from it, we can aspire to it. The thing we've concluded in the last 18 years there is purpose is the first key. When you have a higher purpose, you have something to strive for around creating social excellence. So a very key slide. Alan, I think that's the last slide. Is that right? Try one more click.
That's our last. Okay. That's it.
All right.
I'm going to put that one up.
Okay. So in summary.
No, I'll go back to this. Go ahead.
Okay. So in summary, it's about seeing all of social reality, seeing the whole curve. Most of us can't. When we put this up there, we start to open the door for seeing that social reality. When we see it, we begin to focus on moving our organization to the right side of the curve. That starts with those 8 steps. Let's consider your questions and see where you take us.
Okay, so we have questions coming in. If you have any questions, put them in the box. But I'm going to start with Bob. I had a conversation with a chief learning officer on Monday this week. Large multi-billion-dollar company. And she said that she had a meeting with her CEO, and it was all about purpose. And she asked the purpose, and he rattled it off quickly. And the reason she was asking the question is we were talking about your book. We were talking about this movement. And he very quickly dismissed any conversation about purpose in any conversation about driving it. He said, it's already done, and here it is. And so I asked her, how do you believe, how consistent do you believe that's followed? And she said, it's absolutely not at all. How does anyone know about it? Absolutely not. Is the leadership team aligned around what he said? No. So my question for you is, when there's a disconnect between someone at the top, in this case it's a CEO, but it could be anybody, and then the next level down, the people that you think of as these real change leaders, both the positive energizers and the mid-level managers, what do you do? Do you have any strategies for people can they move forward without approval and just start working on it? Can they try different approaches to reconnect? Have you seen anything like that?
Oh, well, that opens so many doors. I'm going to try to conserve my words. The first is, number one, you just described the dominant pattern. A CEO has social pressure to produce a purpose statement. So they do. And they check off on the to-do list, produce statement. I've now met my obligation. They never, ever imagined or even could conceive of an authentic purpose driving social excellence, because they don't believe that's possible, because the principal agent problem dominates microeconomic thinking. So you're describing the most real thing in the world. The most common question I get asked by desperate people is they tell me some version of that story, and they say, what hope is there for me and my people? And the assumption is there's none. And I spend enormous amounts of time with people who are middle to senior executives, telling them not only can they, but it's their responsibility to create social excellence in the middle of that bad system. Because the CEO doesn't lead doesn't mean you can't lead. And I say, oh, no, it does. I can't lead. And they again tell me all the constraints. And I say, he can't do it because he thinks like you. This whole challenge here is at every level for every one of our leaders to create social excellence through higher purpose. And here's the kicker. In every organization, there's some manager doing it. That manager may be at the very lowest level of management. That person may be in the middle of management. That person may be at the top of management. But we find excellent units. In fact, your poll suggests this is true because you say you have pockets of it. We already have it. If that's true, we ought to be there examining those positive deviants and learning, because that person's already done it in our system where we know it's impossible. So, Alan, you're raising one of the central most determinants of not creating positive organizations. And my message is, it's absolutely possible. You just have to think around these things we've covered today. And it's not easy. It's terrifying because it means risk-taking.
Yeah, so let me try and thank you for that. I want to just try and make this real. So a lot of people on this call are CorpView customers, and we deliver tens of thousands of people through digital or through our guided learning journeys, through online leadership development journeys. And so a lot of these people are chief learning officers, chief HR officers, and they're trying to figure out. So based on what you just said, that gives me great hope. Does it seem if you find a pocket, would they be, do you imagine that we can do a program for 30 to 50 people in a business unit or in a department or in a function where they want to build their own purpose, and they can do their best to align it to what we'll call the CEO purpose as opposed to a true shared collective purpose? Is that workable on a tactical basis? And is that what you meant by saying some people are just doing it in different in pockets in terms of actually doing real purpose work?
The answer is absolutely yes. I'm thinking of a company in Chicago. They have an OD person off. Typically, the OD person is seen as not being very powerful in organizations. This person and this organization is very financially driven. The culture is harsh. And this person just set out on their own to build units that were purpose-driven. And so this person runs workshops, provides support systems, And in the face of the culture, which is pushing in the opposite direction, is actually building purpose-driven units. And they are thriving, and it's causing consternation. How can this possibly be? There's a major company that has a very harsh culture that I work with all the time, 40 executives at a time. They always come in, tell me everything is impossible. And the social pressure in that room is for everybody to agree. Usually by Tuesday, someone whispers to me, my unit's positive, my unit's purpose-driven. I say, what? And they get flustered because they don't want to be embarrassed in front of that group. And I drag them in front of the room. I make them tell the story. And then 2 or 3 others say, well, mine is too. And then I drive the poor group of 40 crazy because I say, okay, 37 of you are telling me it's impossible. These 3 people are doing it in your culture. And I remember one of those people saying, I took over a unit. We're 80% behind plan. No one else wanted it. I just started applying purpose, and we created a positive organization. We're now way ahead of plan. But here's my bottom line. Why would I lead any other way? When I get up in the morning, I'm hungry to go to work because I love this unit. We're having great experiences. Why would you lead in any other way? That's a profound question. We're terrified to think about doing it. The payoffs are enormous, and it can happen in the darkest systems on the planet. So the answer is a definite yes.
What do you think about leaders showing vulnerability? So I think you gave an example there, and I think people write books about being vulnerable, and leaders don't, they tend to put up a veneer. But what you described, I think, requires it requires humility and vulnerability. Can you talk about that? Just, do you see that? Do you coach that?
Absolutely. Authenticity and vulnerability are sisters. They go hand in hand. Everything that we learn is to never be vulnerable. You've got to pretend to know everything, to be an expert. We gravitate to the expert role, and that produces everything in the middle of the curve that I had up there. One of the very first steps is being caring enough about your purpose and about creating a new system that you dare to be vulnerable. And that's, I have to put senior executives through hands-on exercises that get them there without their knowing it, that they're doing it, so that they discover it. And then they're transformed by it. And then they begin to see it for the first time in their lives. They're 50 years old. They've never seen it. They can't imagine it. It's a key piece. But if you're going to be a learning organization instead of a knowing organization, the knowing organizations are always dying. If you're going to be a learning organization, part of the equation is learning how to be vulnerable together. And most organizations have no idea how to do that. That's one of the things higher purpose brings to you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's obviously a deep topic. I feel like we could spend an hour on that, but I'm gonna move on so that we can take some external questions. I have one here from Margaret. What will it take for leaders to shift from short-term focus in order to make purpose work, as it's often emphasizes the purpose often emphasizes long-term value? But so how do you advise people that are living in a sea of short-termism?
Yeah, that's just about everybody. And if it's not you, it's the culture you live in, right? But now we're starting to see the empirical data showing the financial payoff. And that's becoming clearer and clearer. I was at the Academy of Management a month ago, and a woman put up a stunning slide. She said, we all know about income inequality and that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. She said, but look at this slide. And she put up this industry slide showing the highest performing organizations in each industry and comparing them to the industry average. And she said, it's the same phenomenon. The best organizations are widening the gap between them and the mean of the industry at an increasing rate. And almost all of them are purpose-driven. Data like that, which is now pouring out, is basically saying the same thing the Roundtable's saying, the same thing that Fink was saying, we're discovering that higher purpose, long-term perspective is more profitable than short-term perspective. You have to make sacrifices, a word we don't like to use. You have to make hard decisions and do things that are inconvenient. It means leaders have to invest and actually be leaders. But, this is where the world is going. Alan's slides at the beginning are even bigger than Alan said. There was a book published 2 years ago that said, look, employees are already there. The millennials are refusing to work for anything other than a purpose-driven organization. They're driving recruiters crazy, but they're already there. Customers are almost at the tipping point, and they gave data for that. Then they said, but when the finance people, the investors get there, there's going to be a revolution. Well, Alan's data is saying, look, the Fink letter says the investors are there. The people at the round table are reading that. This revolution is happening today. We're living in the revolution today. In the meantime, we're still stuck in the cement of short-termism. If you're listening to this broadcast, one of the most significant things you can do in your professional life is to set your stake in the ground and say, I'm going to go after my boss's boss, all the people around me. I am going to drive this message because it's for the good of my company. And you may have to lead your boss to do it, but that's what this is about.
Yep, that's it's such a powerful concept, and I'm gonna go with one more question, and then I wanted to talk about the upcoming program that we're going to run that people can get a small team from their organization, because I think we have a way to get this jump started for a bunch of people that are with us today. But before we get to that, I have one other question that I wanted to get to, and it's about hitting. Have you ever seen anything that looks like a tipping point? So how do people hit a tipping point when these things start in pockets? How is there a way to get it to tip over to a majority in the organization? Have you seen that? Is there any sort of advice for how to get people to get it to the majority, to get it over the hump?
Yeah, I think that's the very change. We think of the change process universally as the CEO gets up, announces the change, HR plays the music, puts up the posters, everybody claps, and they go back to the desk, and what do? They do nothing. They sit and wait to see if it's real.
Business as usual.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why most change doesn't happen. If the purpose stuff is real, then we're going through the 8 steps. If we're going through the 8 steps, one of the ways to do that is you go to all the most prominent high potential pockets first. You create small wins, and then you spread the disease. It's not a top-down dictation. It's a infectious model of creating small wins everywhere you can and spreading the success. If you start to do that and then combine it with your top-down processes, you have a very different outcome than if you do it that first case that you just articulated, the CEO who says, I've already done this, here's the purpose, and there's virtually no purpose in the system. That's the contrast. And so I could talk for hours about this particular question and give examples, but that's what it's all about. And you can start at the top, you can start in the middle, you can start at the bottom. Everybody can be a leader. Most executives are not leaders, but you can be.
Well, I'm hoping everybody on this call is a leader. They're in charge of leadership development. They're trying to develop and grow hundreds or thousands of leaders in large organizations. And that's going to that brings us right to talking about what's happening. So on October 14th, we're going to start a 1-week online program, a guided learning journey. And it's going to be, it's our 1-week version of becoming a purpose-driven organization. So we have a multi-week purpose online program. We have an executive version for the senior team, and then this is for cascading to people. But this is a great way to just give it a shot. And what I would say is, for the folks on this call, many of you are our customers, CorpU, but some of our invited guests. If you'd like to do that, we'd love to have you. And ideally, you'd bring 3-4 people from your same company so that you can and remember, all of our sprints, they're 30 minutes a day, day 1 through 4, with a 1-hour live event just like this one on day 5, except there's more conversation with the group because it's a smaller cohort of people. But you'll go through this journey together with others. And I think it's going to be transformational. We haven't run this program before, so it's brand new. So this October 14th is our first running. We'd love to have everybody do it. Bob, you're going to be our faculty doing the live day on the 18th. So it's going to be exciting. We're going to hear from a bunch of different companies that are going to go through this journey together, and we're going to be able to start the dialogue. We'll harness the collective intelligence of the group and the cohort, and hopefully you'll all be able to start planting seeds of purpose in your organizations as you go back. And again, because it's a guided journey, we don't try and cram it all into one day. We take a little bite every day. We engage with others to make sure that we're reflecting and learning and harnessing the collective intelligence, and then we'll unpack it all on day 5, see what we learned. And for those that want to go further, of course, you can take the full program, the more in-depth version, and you can tailor it and run it in different pockets of your organization. Whether we go top down or bottom up or inside out or outside in, you've got a lot of different ways to think about how to use this powerful set of new tools. So with that, I'm going to say thank you all for attending, and most importantly, Bob, Quinn, thank you so much for joining us. This was a fantastic session. Always love when we have you on, and all of our interactions. I learned so much every single time. So we're just greatly appreciative of your time today. So thank you again.
Thank you, Alan.
All right. We're signing off. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day and a great rest of your week.